in 2022, Bangladesh in 2024, and most recently Nepal in 2025, serve as stark reminders of how quickly economic pressures can build and lead to broader instability. In the case of Sri Lanka, it is clear that the main source of instability was the successive government's tendency to prioritize electoral politics over some economic policies. There are many other reasons as well, too numerous to list here. This explains why the country sought IMF support 17 times since from 1965 to 2023, a record only surpassed by one other South Asian country. After Sri Lanka's default in 2022, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan also sought IMF assistance to address their balance of payment needs. Although the circumstances differ, the pattern remains evident. Persistent current account and fiscal deficits, declining foreign exchange reserves, high external debt and servicing costs, global economic shocks, structural economic weaknesses, political instability and policy errors, and inadequate governance have collectively driven these crises. Managing public finance goes beyond simply balancing budgets. It requires a broader institutional effort, including fiscal governance frameworks, budget procedures, transparency mechanisms, financial reporting, and accountability. Weaknesses in any of these areas can threaten stability. Across South Asia, the rapid increase in public debt has become one of the most critical vulnerabilities of our time. We are also operating in a significantly changed global economic landscape, new trade restrictions, supply chain realignments, and the pursuit of economic security or economic efficiency have eroded long-standing principles such as most favored nations treatment, etc. For small open economies, this has eroded the space for external engagement. As a result, domestic policy choices have become more critical than ever. How governments manage fiscal systems, allocate scarce resources, and set priorities will increasingly determine their economic trajectories. In this context, several themes become essential. First, fiscal transparency and credibility are now essential for rebuilding sustainability and restoring public trust. Without transparent processes, it becomes difficult to mobilize revenue, rationalize expenditure, or anchor expectations about the future. Second, the effectiveness of expenditure matters as much as its scale. South Asian governments often spend significant amounts, but outcomes, particularly the infrastructure, health, education, and social protection, are not proportional. Improving efficiency in the fiscal sector is therefore not just an academic concern, it is a key economic priority. Third, learning from the best practices both within and beyond the region is essential. Many countries have effectively reformed their fiscal frameworks by strengthening institutions, adopting rules-based fiscal policies, enhancing public financial management systems, debt management, etc. South Asian economies can gain significantly by adapting these lessons to their own context. This brings me to our keynote speaker today, Mr. Anoop Singh. Mr. Singh is well placed to lead today's discussion. His extensive and respected career at the International Monetary Fund, where he led the Asia Pacific and Western Hemisphere departments, provided him with a close view of some of the most crucial economic crises of our era, from Asia in the late 1990s to Latin America in the 2000s. He has worked closely with governments to develop crisis response strategies, strengthen fiscal governance, improve oversight frameworks, and restore macroeconomic stability. His role in Sri Lanka as IMF President Representative was commendable for introducing economic reforms in the late 1970s, which transformed our country from an inward-looking to a market-oriented economy. His recent work on managing public finances in the new global era is especially relevant for South Asia today. It explores how fiscal systems must adapt to a world characterized by rising debt, geopolitical shifts, climate-related vulnerabilities, which we have very recently experienced, and a narrowing margin for policy errors. Most importantly, his work emphasizes that sound fiscal governance is not just about avoiding crisis, it is about laying a foundation for inclusive growth and long-term development. As far as the Pathfinder Foundation hopes that today's discussion will assist in identifying practical approaches for developing more resilient fiscal systems, encourage reflection on transparency, accountability, and institutional strengthening can help prevent future crises, explore strategies to enhance debt management, and finally, consider how public finance can better support countries' long-term development objectives, especially in an era when domestic economic policy is more important than ever. The experience of recent years have shown that South Asia cannot afford to treat fiscal management as routine or technical management. It is strategic, it is foundational, and when neglected, the consequences reverberate far beyond the realm of economics. After what Sri Lanka faced last week, what we discussed today could possibly be academic. The devastation caused to the entire country is so extensive, we may have to start from zero with no sight of the end. With this brief remarks, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Anoop Singh, former Director of Asia and Pacific Department of the International Monetary Fund, who has very kindly agreed to join us to conduct this gathering on the subject what we are focusing today. Over to you, Mr. Singh.
All right, thank you very much. I assume you can hear me fine. Thank you so much for having invited me. Let me first start by saying how sorry and shocked I am by the effects of the cyclone on Sri Lanka. Until yesterday, I wasn't yet aware how severe the effects have been. And given my time in Sri Lanka, this is a great personal shock for me. But having said that, let me start with my brief presentation on the issue of the new global era that I think we are all entering. And I'm going to make two initial points, both of which have already been said by the opening speaker, who gave an excellent presentation and summary of what the problem is. Let me see how I can add to that. We're entering a global context where public expenditure and public finance is likely to be the main driver of growth. This is partly because we are moving away from the trade-dominated world that we have had globally for many years. Now, the issue that arises is the timing of this shift to public finance is unfortunate and untimely from a global perspective. Why do I say that? Today's problem with debt is not about the debt of Sri Lanka, is not about the debt of emerging markets, which are, however, a great problem. But the problem today is that we are facing a historically high global debt. And the countries that are part of this situation are the advanced economies, especially the United States, especially Europe and China. In all these cases, especially the US and China, we're probably looking at public debt properly measured. And the key is properly measured of something around 120% of GDP, which is probably higher than what the countries are disclosing. Now, the issue for this discussion, from my point of view, is why are we at this stage? And the issue of why, I think, is the most important issue for us and for you to consider. Why have we reached this stage? We know that 10 years ago and 5 years ago, we were in a global crisis, and countries and multilateral institutions and the IMF and the World Bank and the OECD, everyone promised that we will not again be in a situation of high global debt. This was the commitment given by countries and institutions. So the issue is, why are we back in a situation of historically high global debt? And it's happening at a time that countries are turning to public expenditure to drive growth. Now, the problem is this. The IMF and other institutions have given a lot of technical assistance, have given a lot of advice, have given a lot of rules and regulations and international standards of how to measure debt, how to avoid high debt. So why are we back in a situation of high debt? I'll come back to South Asia later on, but that is what I need us all to consider. Why are we at this stage? Now, the issue is, we need to understand where the spending goes and by whom and how it is financed. Unless we're able to see that expenditure, unless we're able to see where it is going, unless we're able to see who is borrowing, unless we're able to see how is it being done, we're not going to be able to manage our debt. So the issue in a very simple way is, what you cannot see, you cannot manage. And the reason why we haven't managed public debt globally, including in advanced countries, is we haven't been able to see what they've been doing to acquire debt. Now, all these countries have had fiscal rules. They were debt rules, including Germany. Germany was for long regarded as the fiscal hawk. Germany was regarded as the one country that would never allow its own fiscal rules to be broken. Now we find out that did happen. They found ways for spending which avoided what they call the debt break. That is their fiscal rule. Now, I have looked at this issue also from India's point of view, And there are details about that in the book that you may have seen. The issue is this. There are what I call data gaps. Now, the issue is, what are data gaps? Well, on the one hand, data gaps are what you cannot see. Now, if you are looking at either spending, subsidies, capital expenditure, or other aspects of public finance, you're looking at inconsistent definitions across items, across states. If you're looking at incomplete data, if you're looking at a situation where a lot of the money that is being used to finance is borrowed but not reported, and if you're looking at borrowing which is taking place and is unreported, that's what I call off-budget liabilities. These conditions, these problems have generally existed across countries. Now, this is very important for countries that are in a crisis. Sri Lanka has faced many crises. And now you are facing a new crisis. And how do you finance the needs of the effects of the cyclone? But before I turn to Sri Lanka, let me spend some more time on India. Now, India has been making a big effort in recent years to say we are raising capital expenditure in order to drive growth. We are trying to reduce subsidies in order to move away from that kind of expenditure. Now, my own comments on this is not at all to comment on whether subsidy is good or bad. I'm not commenting on whether capital expenditure is good or bad. I'm not commenting on what type of spending is needed. I'm only commenting on, is the data available to see how much a country like India is spending on subsidies or capital expenditure or other expenditures. Now, when we looked at this, it was very complicated because the data are not available both for center and states. India has an institution called the Controller General of Accounts. That is the only institution that knows what is going on, but all it is an auditor. So its reports come out 2 years later. And even the Controller General of Accounts does not have all the information as to what spending is being done and by whom. So what we found is that in recent years in India, where India says subsidies have been reduced and capital expenditure raised, the data tells us the opposite. They actually tell us that in the center and the states of India, actually capital expenditure has fallen, not risen, and subsidies have gone up and not gone down. It all comes down to what you call capital expenditure. Now, this comes to the issue of definitions, which affect all countries. There are international standards as to what is capital expenditure, which are not followed. Now, for example, if you're investing in a financial asset, if you're giving a loan for whatever purpose, it is not capital expenditure. Capital expenditure must be the acquisition of a physical asset. But countries are routinely reporting other activities as capital expenditure, which is not consistent with the normal definition. Then the issue comes to financing. Much of this is being financed in ways which are not revealed. It's the off-budget side. The off-budget side has two aspects. Not only does it hide what is being financed, it also builds up liabilities which become official public liabilities in due course. So the issue is, why are we across the world at this stage, in advanced countries and India and other emerging markets, and the implication for Sri Lanka? After many months of study and conversation with officials in India and otherwise. The problem arises what I've called data gaps. The data gaps are simply what is concealed, what is not known in terms of spending, what is not revealed in terms of definitions, what is incompletely reported, and what is inconsistent across different states of India. So, what, say, the state of Punjab may call a subsidy is different from what a state like Tamil Nadu may call that subsidy. So, the issue is why is this the case? And my answer is very clear. And this is what I want you all to consider how we deal with it. Globally, there have been international commitments through G20 to clean up the fiscal accounts to have better public financial management. Countries have committed to it. India has too. IMF and others have given assistance. How do you measure accurately in order to get the right number? So that we're given technical assistance. People have thought that in some states of India or some states in another country or somewhere, people have thought maybe the officials aren't well trained. Maybe they don't know how to do it. And we need to give them more time. They need more assistance technically to learn how to measure and report data. So we've been through all this. The world has done this for the last 25 years. The issue is data gaps exist for only one reason. They are intentional, in my view. They are not because you are unable to measure. They are not because you don't know how to do it. They are not because you need more staff. You may well need more staff. But the basic reason why the problem has arisen of unreported spending, misclassified spending, and inconsistently defined, and therefore, in the end, the understatement of debt is because it has been, in my view, intentional. Now, in order to change this, we not only have to create rules and laws and systems, but they are not going to work unless the authorities implementing them intend to do it. And by authorities, it's not just one central government, it's all the ministries, it's all the states. So the issue is how do you get all reporting and spending bodies reporting in the similar way? Now, I'm not saying this is for every country. For countries like Brazil, for example, I believe that their data follows international standards. I believe that in the case of Brazil, the data of the states, the provinces of Brazil, are known within 3 months of every quarter. And I believe that they are audited in Brazil within 3 months. So the issue is this: there needs to be intention, and in order to ensure there is intention, there need to be a number of additional institutions. You need to have an auditor or a system of audits that will catch this. Not 2 years after the event, but 3 months afterwards. So Sri Lanka has come a long way in the last 1 year. I recognize that Sri Lanka has taken very important steps in the course of the IMF program. I recognize that Sri Lanka has passed new laws, new conditions for public debt, reporting, fiscal management. Sri Lanka has actually carried out much of the proposals made by the IMF as part of the current crisis. That is extremely good news. It does not mean, however, that it's all done. Partly because some of the debt is still being restructured, is not completed, partly because it's not clear public enterprises and all public bodies whose liabilities become that of the central government. It's not clear that those institutions' debt is going to be covered by Sri Lanka's new public management and debt laws. So we need to make sure that the laws themselves are covering all sources of debt, including of all public bodies and enterprises. I think they are not covering all enterprises, and you may know more. But then there's the issue of how and when are they audited, and that's very important. Now, Sri Lanka is facing a major crisis today from the cyclone. My understanding is it is a major crisis. Everything needs to be done, therefore, to manage it. My only comment is that from a public financial management point of view, from the manner of giving assistance, from the manner of spending, from the reporting of spending for the cyclone, every step needs to be reported, monitored, and audited. Because it's due to the cyclone, does not in any way allow it to be unreported. So I think what you've done is, in the last 1 year, is very, very important. The issue now is you need to apply that as new spending happens to meet the needs from the cyclone. And therefore, the next 1 year is going to be crucial as a test of the new laws and new provisions that you have instituted in the last 6 months. These are very important issues and will determine the next 5 years. I'm glad you're all here. Thank you for speaking to me. But my issue is it's not only a problem of Sri Lanka, it's not only a problem of India or South Asia, it's global. And to deal with it, you need more than the IMF telling you what to do. There needs to be intention on the part of governments to carry it out. That is what has been lacking, and that's what we must openly discuss now. Thank you very much.
That was Mr. Anoop Singh, former Director of the Asia and Pacific Department of the International Monetary Fund. And thank you for your address. We have a slight change in our program. I will now invite Dr. R.H.S. Samaratunga, Distinguished Fellow of the Pathfinder Foundation and former Secretary of the Ministry of Finance and Planning, to speak. He will speak on Sri Lanka's post-crisis fiscal sector reforms. You have the floor, Doctor.
President Mr. Gunatilaka, Chairman, Pathfinder Foundation, Mr. Anoop Singh, distinguished panelists and discussants, ladies and gentlemen. What I propose in this discussion is to talk the Sri Lanka's experience with respect to fiscal sector reforms. We have started late 2022 after the crisis. Before I move into the subject, I would like to say the few words about in fact those ideas drawn from Mr. Anoop Singh's the introductory Mr. Anoop Singh's recent book and its introductory chapters. It's very important subject as he has mentioned, that we have not paid due attention in our policy making in general. We are witnessing a gradual departure from the cherished MFN-based international economic transactions, which enabled small countries like ours to improve our greater economic integration to benefit, enhance the socio-economic progress of the country like ours. And major powers are into, at least it looks so as to us, and the way they are behaving. Major powers are into transaction-based international economic engagements, not following, not adhering to the past 7 decades of post-war MFN rules. This is reflected in the global level uncertainties as well. See, this picture was drawn from World Uncertainty Index. It shows that after 2024, after 2024, the uncertainty, these are general trends with respect to overall uncertainties have been the rising rapidly, and also, as he rightly said, that the trade-related uncertainties are also going along with that rapid change. This doesn't fit good for small country like ours. Therefore, government's domestic decision making, internal decision making, have become the crucially important for the promotion of its own economic well-being and the social welfare as well. Therefore, judicious management of fiscal affairs, among the others, significantly influence the pace of economic growth and welfare. Hence, it's time for us to re-examine quality and direction of public expenditure in general at various levels of the government. This especially is important because 3 countries in South Asia in our region are facing the various levels of it's a socio-political crisis, also the underpinned by major economic foundation cracks as well. Sri Lankan crisis, not the crisis that we are going to see in the now, but this crisis that we saw in 2022 was due to, generally agreed that this is due to unattended long-standing structural issues, compounded by recent after 2019 policy missteps, and also the major uncontrollable events like COVID-19 and other political upheavals in this country as well. We embarked on the fiscal sector reform, not basically on the basis of our sort of thinking and analysis, but because of the crisis we faced in 2022 April onwards. It was basically a solvency crisis as well. Therefore, we had to go to IMF for the 17th time. IMF wanted us to look at our books very seriously this time. Primarily because the IMF took that, noted that our debt situation was unsustainable. They hinted that even in 2021, but declared that the Sri Lanka debt was unsustainable by the early 2022, first quarter 2022. Therefore, they wanted us to very seriously look at the policy making and implementation in all spheres of the economy. 12th of April 2022 was the day which marked not a good event. The sovereign default for the first time after independence. We had a good record of obliging to the external obligation, also internal as well. But we have broken that record, proud record. We said to the rest of the world that we were not able to oblige to repay our external debt, after 12th of April 2020. Then we start talking to IMF. That was the only avenue that was left to us at that time. And it was a very difficult time. Unlike previous 16 times, this time IMF was asking us to seriously look at our debt situation, without which they were not being. They told us they were not ready to help us with. Therefore, we had to talk to our external partner for 6.5 months before the program was approved on the 20th of March 2023 for countries with unsustainable debt. IMF won't help us. Therefore, we had to the work first, agree with our external creditors before going to IMF, to go for approval. This program had the three important elements: restoration of macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability. Second was safeguarding the financial stability, and third one is based to unlocking our growth potential. The reform required to unlock our growth potential. This was the program strategy that I am going through these areas, because only on the basis of IMF program only we embark on very serious fiscal sector reform. This is familiar term, the revenue-based fiscal consolidation we have seen in earlier programs as well, which we have not done properly, accompanied by strong social safety net, fiscal institutional reforms, post-recovery based, the energy priority which we ignored for decades. Restoration of public debt sustainability, including through debt restructuring. The next one is multi-pronged strategy to restore price stability and rebuilding reserves with greater exchange rate flexibility. The last one is policy to safeguard financial sector stability. Anyway, our financial sector is very conservative, therefore it's basically escape any problem that we saw in other countries. This is how we went through the fiscal sector reforms. Started as suggested and agreed with IMF in the third quarter 2022 itself. We start looking at very seriously the SOE sector, particularly CB and CPC, biggest loss-making enterprises at that time, and for decades, probably from the beginning of those institutions in 1960s, we allowed them to incur losses and never wanted to at least see the break even. IMF bought crisis pricing program, the reform, and that we did, and energy prices are adjusted regularly now based on agreed formula agreed with IMF. Second one is the IMF wants us to look at our safety net programs, which wasn't adequate the look after the various poor and vulnerable groups. We agreed on the new program called Aswasumani, implemented in September 2022. And most importantly, they want us to look at very seriously our taxation. By the time the crisis hit in April 2022, our tax total revenue to GDP was one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in the world, 8.2%. With expenditure hovering around 20%, we were managing our expenditure with a revenue generated at 8%. Unbelievable level of the reform required to bring about the at least the comfortable level of revenue to this country. This was our debt at the end of 2022 when we were going through the most difficult time in the crisis. About 84 billion US dollars, both external and internal. And At that time, it was like, the 50-50, the domestic and external. Having gone through moratoria, debt postponement, and haircut, this is, what it looks like today. About 64% external domestic debt, and the external debt is 36%. This was our debt against the GDP. Is slowly coming down with the rapid expansion of GDP after third quarter of 2023. Thereafter, consequently, 6 quarters we saw the contraction of the economy. 2022 third quarter onwards, we see the expansion, the continuous up until this crisis. This is how we did our debt restructuring as we agreed with the IMF. The DD was, domestic part was completed in 2023, just within few months. Official bilateral debt was, the agreed on late 2023, the agreement in principle. MOUs, I think, we are almost at the end, the signing MOUs. Third one was, the commercial debt, including sovereign bonds. We agreed on the principles on the 19th of September 2024. So more work needs to be done. This is how we ran through our budget since the crisis. We had to agree to the reasonable level of primary balance, generation of positive primary balance. The agreement was to at least sustain the 2.3 level of 2.3% of primary balance, and also the gross financing needs of the government should not exceed 13%. So far, we have adhered to those numbers. With that, we have presented about 5 budgets and also 1 vote on account so far. The one which is being debated to Parliament, was presented in November 2025 for the next year. This is how the fiscal balance look like. After having gone through the 2 years of reforms, we see the expansion of economy after third quarter 2023. We see the reasonably looking fiscal balances, basically primary balance. Primary balance, positive primary balance is now available for the country from 2023 onwards. I am sure that this year 2025 also will report the positive primary balance. But unfortunately, we have not very seriously looked at this problem. Many economists, central bank, treasury, and also the outsiders, insisted that over the year that we should the very serious look at in fiscal policy formulation, the primary balance. Unfortunately, during the last 76 years, we had primary balance only in 7 years. 1954-55, 1992, 2017 and 18, and last 2 years, 23 and 24. 76 years from the independence, we had only 7 years of the positive primary balance reported in this country. Country's expenditure were traditionally based on the Annual Appropriation Act of 1931. The first State Council days, you have annual appropriation accounts being presented, and on that basis, the expenditure is basically managed. However, in this country, actual work of management is done based on regulations, not based on the piece of legislation passed by the government. There was practice from 1931, from the Donamo Constitution days, to go on the basis of FR, financial regulation. Financial regulation didn't have the required legislative backing, and it was issued on the basis of the authority of the Cabinet of Ministers. Change, from time to time, but didn't have, the legal backing. Therefore, we saw and also the IMF, thirdly insisted that, that we should have, the legal backing for, the country's public expenditure management, on which basis Parliament enacted Public Financial Management Act number 44/24, effective on the 9th August 2024. This enabled us to fill, the legal gap that remained over, the several decades in this country. This sets out Public Financial Management Act sets out fiscal standards, expenditure standards, requirements, rules, procedures for transparency, accountability, discipline, effectiveness, and efficiency, and the economy in the management of public finance, including revenue, expenditure, commitment, financial arrangement, equity, assets, liabilities, etc. However, those are in line with, this piece of legislation it's in line with, Constitution's public finance chapter, which has, the 5 key articles, 148, 49, 50, 51, and 52. This certainly will help improve what, Mr. Anoop Singh, the introductory chapter says, the quality of public expenditure in this country. We have, the legislative requirement now that, the Treasury has to, the periodically go before the Public Finance Committee and also the COPA and see that, those requirements are met and periodically reported. Second important reform is public debt management. We didn't have, the proper, all-embracing, comprehensive public debt management law in this country. Public debt was, managed in 4 different phases, 4 different agencies in the government. Treasury is public, National Budget Department. Treasury is External Resources Department. Then the Treasury Operations Department and the Central Bank. All 4 got together to look at, the public debt in this country from the days from 1948, from the days of independence. But this lacuna was highlighted by many, but until we hit the 2022, and shown emphasized by IMF, we did very serious look at the public debt in this country. We had the certain hits in the past as well, but we were not serious enough to the serious look at the public debt scenario in this country. This helps strengthens the centralized the management of the debt. Public debt management office was established under this one. You have a centralized agency and improve accountability and transparency, ensure the implementation of efficient and transparent borrowing practices, which was one of the reasons why we had to go through this stance on the 12th of April. This improves, as Mr. Anoop says, certainly improve, the fill data gaps, also the reporting gaps in our borrowing programs. Finally, we have one more slide to be shared with you. The most important one, I guess. The new central bank acts, it's in the realm of, the monetary sector management in the country, but it has, the unbroken link with the treasury from 1950 onwards, the day it was established. The Monetary Law Act, the previous incarnation was, they established 1958 and with that, central bank was established in this country. On that day onwards, the Treasury Secretary has a very easy way to fill the budget gap. But Dr. Coomaraswamy, nowadays, they used to tell me, ST has, my checkbook. He always writes it. but not anymore. We have a new Central Bank Act. Central Bank Act, 16th of 2023, effective on the 15th of September 2023 onwards. That chapter is basically closed. And in section 89, there are subsections of the new act says, CBSL shall not directly or indirectly grant credit to government or any government agency owned by the government. And also another section basically prohibit central bank. It says central bank shall not purchase securities issued by the government or any other government entity or by public entity in the primary market. So the ST has to find its own money to, if you have to spend. CBSL cannot fund treasury budget deficit anymore. That chapter is basically closed. It was one of the good fiscal sector reform in this country, which central bankers and also the very many policymakers, they advocated for decades to, remove these two institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was Dr. Samaratunga, former Secretary of the Ministry of Finance and Planning and also Distinguished Fellow of the Pathfinder Foundation. Now I would like to invite Dr. Indrajit Coomaraswamy, Distinguished Fellow of Pathfinder Foundation and former Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, to take the floor. You have about 20 minutes, Dr.
Pastor Grantalaka, ladies and gentlemen, let me first say what a pleasure it is to see Anoop on the screen. It would be even nicer to see him in person, but the next best thing. I don't know how many of you know, but Anoop, without the fear of being contradicted, I can say that Anoop was the midwife who delivered Sri Lanka's landmark reform program in 1978. He was the resident representative for the IMF, the country at the time, and worked extremely closely with the Sri Lankan authorities on that program, which liberalized the economy and shifted direction in policy. So there's a lot we owe for. And since that time also, whenever we got into a bind, Anoop allowed us to use his good offices to see us through some tricky difficulties over the years. So Anoop has been a great friend of Sri Lanka many years now. I haven't had a chance to read Anoop's book because I've just got it. But what I'm going to do is to really, I think some of the things I'm going to say will definitely be of relevance to the book. What I'm going to do is to pick up on Dr. Samaratunga's remarks and ask the question whether the reforms that have been introduced through the Public Finance Management Act, Central Bank Act, etc., have addressed the problems that have occurred again and again in terms of macroeconomic management of the economy. Because as you know, at the time of independence, we were second to Japan, most macroeconomic indicators. We were ahead of Singapore and South Korea as late as the mid-60s. Today, Singapore has a per capita income of over 80,000. Korea, per capita income of over 30,000. I think at the end of last year, we had 4,200. So that has been the kind of regression in our performance over the last 70 odd years. And while the causality for that slippage is complex, and there are lots of political, social factors, on the economic front, the repeating bouts of macroeconomic stress that we have experienced has been a major explanatory factor. And of the economic strengths that have affected our performance, the government's fiscal performance probably comes out number one. Of course, and that is evidenced, macroeconomic bouts of macroeconomic stress is evidenced in the 17 IMF program we've had. For some of those programs, particularly before I can say 1980 when our economy started to diversify. Before that, when we were very much a commodity economy, often a commodity price shock caused the IMF program. But since then, I would say it has been more domestic policy missteps which have actually contributed to the macroeconomic stress that we have experienced. Okay, so what have we done, and has it addressed these the sources of instability that have emerged from time to time? So the new paradigm for macroeconomic management has five pillars. The first, which Samaratunga described very well, is the public finance management. That's really the centerpiece because the fiscal performance has been the main problem. And now that we have to have a primary surplus, we will not, I hope in the future, have fiscal deficits which feed into instability of the economy, which pump excess demand, aggregate demand into the economy, which lead to balance of payments and price pressure. This has happened again and again. And hopefully, this is a thing of the past, because with the primary surplus in the budget, it's become much less likely that practice will occur. Not only that, I think we, in terms of the fiscal, the disturbance caused by fiscal instability also flows through into monetary policy. There has been considerable fiscal dominance in monetary policy as well. There are two channels through which this fiscal dominance has largely taken place. One is, as Dr. Samaratunga pointed out, the central bank's consistent financing of the government by financing its deficit through participation in the primary auctions, through treasury or overdrafts, etc. And as he very pointedly said, that can no longer be done. The central bank can no longer fund the government's deficit. Major change. So that again cuts out one of the sources of instability. Primary balance cuts out one source of instability. The central bank not being able to fund the deficits of the government cuts out another source of instability. And the third source of instability that has been addressed through the Central Bank Act is the financial repression. By that I mean the artificial administration of interest rates. If you recall, I think in 2020 or 21, there was a 5% cap placed on the one-year Treasury bill, which dragged down the whole yield curve, and there was massive overheating of the economy because of the credit bill. You can no longer do that because under the flexible inflation targeting, which is the monetary policy regime that's now being pursued by the central bank, the interest rate is set on a data-dependent basis with a forward-looking perspective. So you can't be setting interest rates administratively anymore. So that's another source of instability that has been taken up. Exchange rate. Historically, we tended to mismanage the exchange rate. We tended to fix it and then defend it by depleting our reserves. And time and again, the experience was that we would end up with a double whammy. We would have a significant depletion of the reserves. And at the end of the day, we had a sharp appreciation of the currency as well. So that also, under FID, the exchange rate is the primary line of defense. And the central bank is now pursuing a flexible exchange rate policy where the supply-demand dynamics of the FX market determines the rate. So yet another source of stability taken out by the exchange rate management practice under the FIT. Then the Public Debt Management Act, ST referred to that as well, from the former ST. I keep calling him ST again, I used to that. The Public Debt Management Act does two things. It addresses the highly fragmented institutional architecture we had for debt management. Prior to this act, we had three places where public debt was managed. The External Resources Department managed bilateral debt. The central bank managed commercial debt, the ASBs, and the Treasury Operations Department managed some of the commercial borrowing. So this was a fragmented architecture which was not conducive for a holistic approach to debt management. In addition, the Public Debt Management Act removed a very tricky conflict of interest that faced the central bank when it had a major role in debt management. So on the one hand, the central bank was expected to set interest rates for price stability. On the other hand, it was supposed to raise money as cheaply as possible for the government. Really, there's a clear contradiction. Those two objectives. So that contradiction has now been taken off as well. So that's another improvement in terms of the framework for macroeconomic policy. Another pillar is the cost-reflective price for SOEs, because the earlier scheme basically had the large deficits incurred by the SOEs meant that they A, undermined the government budget, B, they undermined the balance sheets of the state banks, and C, they led to a misallocation of resources. And as they also in practice led to a highly inefficient process of providing social safety nets. Because having untargeted subsidies through the pricing policy of the SOEs, what happened in practice was that untargeted benefits were given the population, which benefited the non-poor more than it did the poor. Now the shift to aspersimer and targeted cash transfers is a major improvement, and this was a step towards having cost-reflective pricing has helped that process, brought about these improvements in efficiency and also in equity. The final pillar of this new paradigm is addressing corruption and governance well. Corruption is actually an implicit tax on development. It increases the hurdle rate of return projects. It leads to a misallocation of resources. And by now, the government has brought in a new corruption act, anti-corruption act, which is aligned with the UN Convention, and also the recommendations of the IMF governance diagnostic is also being implemented. All this, I think, should over time improve the performance in terms of efficiency of the system and also I think the return the country gets on its investments. So what is different this time? Interestingly, the country of Sri Lanka had an IMF extended fund facility between 2016 and 19 as well. And the content of that extended fund facility was very similar to the present. And a number of areas where progress was made. For instance, Mangala Samaravira and Samaratunga were able to achieve primary surpluses. Remember, there were only 4 or 5 over 70 odd years. They were able to achieve primary surpluses in 2017 and 2018 because of the kind of revenue enhancement-based fiscal consolidation that was introduced under the previous extended fund. In addition, the work on the central bank bill was started at that time. In fact, the bill was presented in Parliament, but we ran out of parliamentary time and couldn't get it passed. So all that work was done and ready in 2019. Government changed and everything was thrown out. So that in a way has now been addressed because a lot of the measures which have now been introduced in the last 2 or 3 years are embedded in laws, right? The Public Finance Management Act, the Central Bank Act, the Public Debt Management Act, corruption, anti-corruption Act. All these things are now embedded in laws. You can change it, of course, with a simple majority in Parliament, but you have to go through that process. You can't have a letter from the President, Secretary, or ST or something said change it. For instance, the Monetary Board in 2017 or 2018 took a decision not to participate in the primary auctions. But instruction came from I'm not quite sure who to say that decision of the previous Monetary Board should be ignored. So the central bank started printing money again. So that kind of thing is more difficult. Possible, more difficult. So what is crucial is that to treat this new paradigm for macroeconomic management as a public good that needs to be protected by all stakeholders in the country. So if anybody sees anybody trying to fiddle about with this new paradigm, I think we should scream and shout and make sure that it is protected, and it's critical. Finally, let me talk about one of the implications of having this new paradigm. I think interest rates will be low for longer. Because we don't have, of course, there could be now this crisis that we're having could cause some pressures, which we did not anticipate. But in more normal circumstances, interest rates will be lower for longer. Because if you don't have the government pumping in excess demand, the central bank not augmenting that through its monetary policy, etc., it should have lower interest rates for longer periods. The exchange rate is likely to be more stable. Of course, it will be different because in the earlier regime, the exchange rate was fixed. So it was under the more market-related regime now, there will be some movement. But those oscillations will be across a much narrower band. You won't have these sharp depreciations that we've had in the past. And people for whom the exchange rate is important should be able to work out trends in the FX market. There are certain times of the year when there are inflows of foreign exchange. Certain other times of the year when there is more outflow. So there is actually a seasonality to the trends, the foreign exchange market. That will actually have impact on the rate. Right? And it within about a 5% rate, it will go up and down. So that is the new regime we have, and we need to get used to. The final point is, this is, I think, relevant where we are now. One has to build buffers, as we can see. I mean, I think fortuitously, because we did spend our capital expenditure last year, we have a big buffer of ₹1 trillion we can use this time. That's not going to be there all the time. But this new paradigm for macroeconomic management will create a better enabling environment, build buffers which are crucial in present uncertainty, manage shocks to the system which are exogenous. With that, let me say that I think this new framework, these series of frameworks that have been introduced as part of the new paradigm for macroeconomic management are a major step forward. And this is what's important. The past, when we've seen egregious policies being introduced, everybody has kept quiet and allowed them to go through. I hope we've learned from that. If we see this framework getting undermined, I think it's up to all of us to shout, scream, and jump up and down. Make sure we protect that public. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coomaraswamy. Now we have listened to our keynote speaker and remarks by Dr. Samaratunga and Dr. Indrajit Coomaraswamy. Next, we can spare some time for a question and answer session. Maybe about 20 minutes, so around that time. How do we start? Around the table, do we have any questions to begin with? Well, until others make up their mind, I have a question actually directed towards Dr. Samaratunga. He spoke about the uh, policy towards SOEs, particularly CPC and CEB, under the new Act 16/2023. My question is, how does that act affect the other white elephant what we have called Sri Lankan Airlines? How are we managing that airline? Doctor?
We have about 255 what we call the important public enterprises in this country. Some of them who regulatory and also commercial parts as well. Many of them have the commercial alone. Sri Lankan is the commercial enterprise, which after series of examination by the various groups, researchers, and also finally by our State Minister Mr. Coomaraswamy, we presented to the government that Sri Lanka should be sold somebody who is willing to buy. And we tried the several times to do some restructuring in whatever the way that we do of partnering, bringing partners and the sharing management experience and so on and so forth. Finally, the government decided to sell it to somebody who is willing to buy this. Nobody came. Because it has the huge debt overhang. Nobody is willing to take that burden. Then the government idea was at that time the debt to be taken over to the government, and this airline should go to somebody who can manage it. That is the time at which the government changed in September 2024. Thereafter, our policy was not to allow enterprises running below break-even. This policy should be applicable on Sri Lanka as well. But with the change of government, I think we followed the different path in policy. In 2024, they imputed about 20 billion into the running of this enterprise. This is as of now. But eventually, burden cannot be continued and should not be borne by people of this country. Eventually, this has to be. We have gone through various schemes of restructuring over the last several years, nothing worked. Therefore, we have to give it to someone who is willing to buy in whatever form in the future. Treasury cannot handle this deficit anymore. Certainly after this cannot be done. Certainly after this new crisis facing the country at the moment.
So in short, until such time we find a buyer or whoever who is trying to or ready to shoulder the burden, the country will have to
Shoulder the burden.
That's the situation.
Shoulder the burden.
And what will be the reaction of the IMF to it, that, if I may?
I think that Coomaraswamy is that and help us with this answer. With the new challenge that we see now, don't we think that the fiscal, monetary, and also IMF program would be recalibrated? We don't know the dimension of this crisis. We haven't seen this level of crisis ever in our lifetime. It's very short during at least last 100 years or so. Therefore, we have to think the fresh on economic and social policy making in this country.
Thank you. Yes,
I think I very much agree with Dr. Samaratunga. Really, I think one would need to have a look at the IMF program afresh. once we are familiar with the impact of the cyclone. And on the Sri Lankan National Airline, I'm not saying that one should get rid of it, but there are countries which have very successful tourism sectors which do not have a national. So it's not crucial to have a national airline to have a tourism sector. It helps if it, but then you have to run it in an effective, efficient way. So that option is also there.
Thank you. Dr.
Morning. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think we heard from all experts, especially public finance guru, Mr. Anoop, and Mr. Anoop Singh, and also two influential people who were involved in deciding policies, laws, and regulations during that period. Also here, Dr. Singh and Dr. Coomaraswamy. Now, what I see that I'm looking at, like we were talking about last 75 years, and then there were small crises, but that the crisis we had 22 is the biggest. But I think looking back, the crisis in a way, though it cost a lot, but in a way it gave an opportunity for us to introduce some fiscal and monetary discipline. Now, one thing is that that 4 or 5 pieces of legislation that were introduced. I think, as was mentioned, that gives rules and standards, parameters for public finance management. These are very critical. I'm not sure even whether other comparable countries have this kind of system, because it's so, with the help of course, IMF, and then these came as a, I think, kind of milestone in our history, economic history, that this kind of legislation came. So one thing we have seen, and also we talk about in the past, is that Dr. Coomaraswamy mentioned about this new paradigm. Now the issue is that in the past, see the paradigm shift always from 1948 and until say 2024, basically there were some paradigms, and then it is 3 years for 5 years, and then again it changed to another paradigm. And then basically, so we were not able to stick to one long-term policy framework, also not only fiscal policy and monetary policy, but also other areas, trade, investment, and other policies. But what happened is that this shifting of paradigm over the years. Now we know that I think Dr. Coomaraswamy, I think for other speakers mentioned about some of the countries who were successful in remarkable growth, like South Korea, or the Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Japan. I think basically Mario also referred to basically per capita income and other things. One thing they had in common is that some kind of consistent policies, and these countries are, of course, these 4 we call tigers, or Asian tigers or whatever, but then after that, emerging economies like Thailand, Malaysia, and all the other countries also, they so one common thing they had got that continuation of policies. Now, so that provided the foundation for economic growth. Basically. Now, we did not have it until 2024. But now, something I'm very happy is that continuation of the policies introduced by one government Now they were as it is continued. So this is to me, it's a big positive factor. Never happened in the history of Sri Lanka. Always change, but yeah, now all these acts were introduced and the policies were introduced. So the basically this continuation of policies and framework, that is something I see as a positive thing at the moment. Now that is a comment, but I have question to our expert. Basically, now all these things, fiscal, public finance management, they are so they are for some purpose. The purpose is to have basically long-term economic growth and raising, improving the living standards of people and to make a prosperous country. Now for that, one piece of act or the legislation which came again during that period, 2024-23, 23, I think, Economic Transformation Act. Basically, you have all these things, the public finance and all these parameters, standards, and all these things. Now, all these things can or could basically lead to economic transformation. I heard that is being, of course, revised, and I don't know where it will be going, but that act introduced various parameters. There are also various institutions. What I'm hearing is that it is economic transformation instead of economic transformation. What I heard is the production transformation. Basically, that is something what is being discussed. I have no details or confirmed sources of information. But then production transformation is very much different from economic transformation. Because economic transformation is a bigger picture, bigger thing, and then the production is a part of that. And then when the production transformation, whether we are going into again another era of protection and import substitution. So that is an issue which is being people are concerned about. Now so anyway, now what I want to know basically from our expert is that now all these things for 2027 IMF program will be over, and it is everything left to us. We have to deal with it. But then now we need to introduce a little bit gradually economic transformation or reforms towards like structural reform towards economic growth, and then finally people to benefit from it. Now, what are the I'm very much concerned about what would be the challenges we face, and whether are there any solutions that at the moment government can take? I know now we are facing with another crisis. Now the issue is that these things can come. Everything, it is not smooth. All these things come, and then that is so basically this is basically what will be the challenges and solution for that economic transformation. I think Dr. Samaratunga was very much involved in drafting that act also. But anyway, this is the question I have.
Thank you, Dr. Atnayaka. May I ask who is going to answer that question?
Dr. Samaratunga and even Mr. Anoop.
We'll comment on this. I'll comment.
All right.
The consistency policy making is in this country has never existed, because we have the 5 to 6 years the electoral cycle, you have the two parties get the change all the time, and they are opposing the views on the economic management in this country, allowing other things. Until they come, we thought that after the ethnic strife is over, the parties will come together to look at the long-term economic program of this country, but it also didn't happen. This is the way in a democracy, it's a kind of a price that we have paid. Now that that you have another crisis, engulfed by about 20 out of 25 districts in this country, which we haven't seen, that will be known to anybody, after some months. The consistency is a must. But as we have seen in the Maharashtra, certain countries in Southeast Asia, the progress very well because the long years of consistent policies. The same time, there are vagaries coming from the external tight, small economy. Without the consistent policy, these vagaries will certainly eat us. It's like what we saw in 2022. The debt crisis. One government says something, the government says a different thing. That they go before people. I mean, at the electoral next cycle, someone else is going to be elected. This we cannot avoid. We are a democratic system. There is no way to do. But we can at least agree on the certain long-term goals at the societal level. By the major political parties in this country, major development goals. The way to reach them, the strategies could be different. At least the major development goals. So say in India, you have for 47. When they complete 100 years after independence, they have the Viksit Bharat. It's a very elaborate program, I think it's shared by everyone in India, major political parties in India. That would be the minor difference here, but they have the goal to become the advanced country by 2047. Likewise, on which basis we thought that our country should also progress towards that, for which we got this transformation bill act the by parliament. But I don't know the fate of this one. With the change of government, there are things which change all the time. Even there are so many pieces of legislation in this country which never got off the ground because of the policy changes. There are good pieces of legislation. For example, this Welfare Management Board was, this passed in 2022 until we resurfaced in 2022. They never wanted to look at this welfare board program. It's a good way to handle at least welfare. Like there is no end or the complete answer to the Ravi's question. Until we agree on the basic premise by the major contending political parties, there is no way that we can progress as we have seen in some Southeast Asian countries. That is my the initial comment.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Would you like to add, Dr. Coomaraswamy?
I'll go after.
Okay.
I know first, right?
International experience.
Mr. Singh, if you wish to contribute to the question.
Yes, yes, thank you. I'll just make one comment. Well, it's very good hearing from all of you, and it's very good to see Indrajit again. I just want to repeat, for the sake of Indrajit, who missed my opening point, my perhaps somewhat controversial observation at the start, that these issues with debt being higher than expected were not due to inadequacies in classification, they were kind of intentional. You may want to think about that. The second issue I would say is there's no doubt that Sri Lanka has now taken a very impressive set of steps in the last 1 year. The issue is this. Does it include the full public sector, including SOEs, including any subnational governments? And it must include every public enterprise, whether it is Sri Lanka or anything else failing or not. And number two, it must adopt a single standard across entities. Now, when I say that, what do I mean? or I think Sri Lanka has done more in this regard in the last 6 months than what India has done. But what India has done in the last 2 weeks, which is therefore not in my book, is something quite incredible. For the first time, India has recognized the need to enforce a uniform expenditure classification across all reporting and spending bodies in the center and states. The issue is there must be a single classification standard definition across all reporting entities. And I want to ask you, is this issue also covered by your own laws? Does it ensure uniform and consistent classification across all reporting bodies? My second and last comment is, are we ensuring monthly and quarterly data reporting by all entities? Are we ensuring auditing within certain time standards? And are we embedding all contingent liabilities into the risk assessment that you have agreed to do? So I think you've done an incredible amount in terms of these reforms. The issue is now of implementing them in the way that you have envisaged, and is making sure it covers all entities in the public sector. So that's my only comment at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Dr. Coomaraswamy, followed by Professor Palpage.
I'll maybe the questions that I'm asked is probably Dr. Saran, the best place to answer maybe that course. But on the consistency of policy point, when one talks about consistency of policies in East, Southeast Asia, people say that those countries were either military dictatorships or one-party states. Therefore, it was a lot easier to have this consistency. But then India is the case in point where you can have a robust, vibrant democracy and still have a consensus on a policy. Right. So there is no excuse for us not to do it. India, with all its extremely robust and adversarial politics, has been able to agree upon a broad framework. They had their massive crisis in 1991, and they came to a conclusion on a policy which they've stuck across the different parties. So it can be done, obviously. It's difficult, but it can be done. The second thing is on the data and stuff. So Samaratunga is a much better place to answer. But I seem to recall that at the beginning of implementation of the previous EFF, the government worked very closely with the IMF to clean up the debt data. There was a major effort made to clean up the debt data, and a lot of progress was made. I don't know whether there have been regression since then, but I think there was a big effort around, I think, 2016, 17, 18 to clean up the data. I don't know whether you want to answer what you asked.
Right. Well, from my side, the only issue was a lot of new debt was unreported.
What about that? Sorry?
That's it. A lot of the new debt was unreported.
Unreported.
What's the unreported?
Unreported debt. You were talking about unreported liabilities.
May I give the floor to Professor Palpage? You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me congratulate Anoop Singh for his excellent book. As Indrajit mentioned, Anoop was in the center stage when we implemented our economic reforms way back in 1977. And I was fortunate in Central Bank to closely associate with him in initiating these reforms. So it's nice to see you, Anoop. I have a question. Was find somewhat negative. I agree with Samaratunga and Indrajit.
between 22 and 24, the government implemented a series of reforms, and these reforms have resulted in positive macroeconomic outlook, macroeconomic indicators. But I have a little question now. We are facing a severe crisis as a result of this natural calamity. But even before this calamity, I was puzzled that macroeconomic indicators are not that rosy in spite of the reforms. I would like to draw your attention to the external sector. Of course, the external sector, monetary policy and fiscal policy go hand in hand. So we can't isolate fiscal policies. Separate compartment. If you look at the trade numbers, the foreign trade deficit has gone up from 2.7, $2.8 billion last year, that is between the first 10 months, January to October. Trade deficit has gone up from 4.7 billion last year to 6.2 billion this year in the first 10 months. Okay. So that is the also payment situation. So it means that we have to borrow more and more to finance this deficit. On the other hand, the Treasury borrows heavily, not from the central bank, but from the market on a weekly basis. So that squeezes the trade situation in the money and capital market. But now I would like to, this brings up to the point of impossible trinity. I'm very fond of this impossible trinity. What it says is that you have to maintain balance between interest rate, exchange rate, and also the capital growth. We had this problem, we faced this problem, as Samaratunga rightly mentioned, in 2022. What happened was the central bank maintained low exchange rate as well as stable exchange rate, of course, overvalued exchange rate. That led to capital outflow from the country. Because we are facing the same kind of situation. Now we have, as I mentioned, we have a balance of payments deficit, but in spite of that, the central bank maintains stable exchange rate. And also, recently, the central bank showed its monthly policy review, probably the board, and the central bank continues to maintain low exchange rate. So, if we go back to the impossible trinity of what is trilemma, this means that when you have lower exchange, overvalued exchange rate plus low interest rate stance, that might lead to capital outflow. So it's a user attract capital inflows in the form of say portfolio of equity in the equity market. So I think we are going to face a severe economic crisis in the near future, and as well as so we have to be mindful that we have to repay the foreign debt starting from 2020 under the debt restructuring program. So I'm sorry that I'm painting not painting a very rosy picture, but these are the facts that policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Who will take the if there is anybody going to respond?
Just one comment on government borrowings have been on the increase, but also within the IMF continuous. The thing is that that we experience the sort of negative inflation for about several months or so, and also inflation rate is hovering around 1%. Government borrowing won't the push the interest rate up that much. This is kind of circumstantial. But in a normal circumstance, normal situation, certainly that will the push interest up. There's no, at least for during the last several months, sort of crowding out kind of thing is not there because there are no opportunities elsewhere in the economy. Oh, the lot of credit is there with the banks. But thing is that the semi-sector is basically born after the crisis and the recovery is, of course, third quarter onwards, the recovery expansion is there. The government come to the 2018, 2019 level, you have to go faster and, for several years also. Then only we see, the kind of, the repercussion that we going to see in the economy. I think it's a good time for government to borrow money from the market.
Thank you. Please.
Thanks, Chair. And we have been listening to three eminent speakers. As someone who was actually involved in formulation of Public Financial Management Act, as a practitioner, we can see we have been able to bring in a lot of discipline by fiscal consolidation with sustainability. There are some 7 odd reports we have to submit to the cabinet along with the budget. And there's a primary expenditure ceiling which is 13%. But my concern is simply having these rules by way of the law. Is the overarching piece of legislation governing the entire public finance management in the country. But my point is simply adhering to these requirements, legal requirements, will not bring about the expected transformation in the economy. For example, we see still we are implementing some projects which may not perhaps bring in the expected return to the economy, even after borrowing over $1 billion. Even after crisis situation, we see we are somewhere digging a tunnel, but ADB now, we are borrowing from ADB about $1 billion USD. For that also, we have brought about some rules into the PFM Act. Earlier, only the National Planning Department was to appraise projects. Now, we have this Public Investment Committee charged by the Secretary is looking at these projects. And likewise, we are now submitting legislative reports, fiscal management report, all that. But behind this, there are many areas which are more trivial to bring about this transformation. For example, we have been talking, okay, we will downsize this public service from 15 million to ideal 800,000. Yes. But those are very politically unpopular decisions. I don't see we have real effort towards this direction. Paying salaries and pensions to this 1.5 million is not the big thing. The productivity loss of having such a big public sector, because we are effectively crowding out the productive labor from the market for inefficient public sector. Those are the more trivial, critical things we must look at alongside this fiscal consolidation or the sustainability. It's my concern.
Thank you. One more question after that. I think there are few online who would like to ask such questions, and we are almost.
Yes,
yes, please.
Research. Yeah. So my question is mostly regarding the data and the transparency part, which Dr. Anoop Singh also emphasized the importance of that, and the Public Financial Management Act also has a heavy emphasis on reporting these data and terms of information. And what we have seen also in the past, like there has been people also advocating for more like data and transparency. And once the public financial management came in place, like we were also glad that it introduced a lot of transparency requirements. and we see that that government would adhere to those things. And what we realized is that since the enactment of the act, two budgets have been released, and we have been highlighting some basic issues on the transparency for a few years, and it seems to be still continuing even in the current budget. So if I would namely say the three things, which is that sometimes there's an inconsistency in the numbers reported in the budget. So the budget speech gives a number, whereas the budget estimates gives another revenue number and the breakdown. And sometimes you find different numbers, like even GDP and macroeconomic assumptions are different in different number reports. And this is a big problem because we are not sure which is the actual number of the budget, because we hope that the budget speech is the most updated one that has the updated numbers. But again, we don't have a disaggregated numbers of, let's say, taxes on goods and services. It just gives the aggregated measure, and it doesn't break it down into VAT, excise, and whatnot, like how these numbers are obtained. And what we also see is that the PFM mentions that the budget speech just has to be a summary of the estimates. And once you see these kinds of inconsistencies, then it's a bit difficult for us also to analyze the budget and see. And another main thing was the macroeconomic indicators like GDP numbers, real GDP and inflation numbers. Those has to be come through the medium-term framework of the government, which is released a few months in advance. And once we see the budget numbers, the GDP numbers in the budget speech, those figures again doesn't tally. Like it comes on a range of 7 to 8%, whereas the medium-term framework gives a different number. And I think the main document in which these basis of creating the budget has to be mentioned in the budget, fiscal, and economic position report. And that report only explains that all the macroeconomic indicators used and all the bases in which the budget is prepared has to be mentioned in that report. So once we even look at against that report, even that report, the numbers are very much different from the budget speech. And even in the PFM Act, it mentions that any updates to the macroeconomic, any updates to the medium-term framework should be mentioned in those. So we find those kinds of issues, and also all tax policies and all the government policies also has to be explained with a basis on how you get that numbers. And sometimes we also see certain budget proposals again as missing estimates, so there is no numbers allocated for those things. So, the whole point that I'm raising on this is because we've seen two budgets come in, and we really, really understand this. The government is this is the first time that it has this act, and it also says in certain parts of the fiscal strategy statements that in terms of doing risk assessment and all, maybe they have to work forward, which we completely understand. And I just wanted to say that now since two budgets have come across, and also we see some of these numbers are pretty much easier to also release, because we see the macroeconomic numbers were given to the COPEF committee, and they had reported that. And we also think the public also has a right to know what are the macroeconomic indicators, and especially the detailed estimates. So yeah, that's my question. What is the difficulty behind reporting? If there is any practical difficulty, we totally understand. But will this remain the same, or maybe in the future, do we expect improvements to these? Yes, that's it.
Thank you very much. I think there are a couple of persons online who would like to ask questions. Maitri,
Yeah.
can you take over, please?
Yes, sure. Both questions are for Mr. Anoop Singh. Although if there are any other replies on the table, feel free to mention them. The first question comes from Tusitadi Jayaratna. He asks, South Asian countries are significant labor exporters, meaning their public financial stability affects global remittance flows. As you said, public finance in South Asia is a global impact. How labor export became significant? How does labor exports become significant in the global economic impact? And whether small countries are doing well within it?
Can you have the second question also?
The second question would be, Mr. Anoop Singh mentioned that data gaps are intentional in Sri Lanka because it was a common practice to park debt in SOEs. But because these were government guaranteed, they were paid with taxpayer money. What are the safeguards against this?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No
We
worries.
will respond to the questions. Mr. Singh, please.
Yeah, but if I got the questions correctly, as far as the global situation is concerned, it will affect all countries, but the issue is how a country responds. Now, my comments have not been about what their response should be. My observations have been whatever you do must be reported transparently. And the issue is not to judge whether you should do A or B. That is for the public or the electorate to decide. What you have to do is reveal, disclose, monitor, and assess transparently what is being spent. That is the most important point. The second question was almost about the same issue. Can you please repeat the
Yes, sure.
second question?
Mr. Singh, you mentioned that data gaps are intentional in Sri Lanka because it was a common practice to park debt in SOEs. But because these were government guaranteed, they were paid with taxpayer money. What are the safeguards against this?
Yeah, that's an important point. When I talked about these things being intentional, I did not want to focus on any one country. I was not commenting on Sri Lanka. What I was saying is, in virtually every case where the debt has exceeded the fiscal rules or the country's debt rules or what they wanted, is because this was done intentionally, not because of a lack of ability, not because of a lack of technical assistance, not because of lack of practice. It was generally intentional. This has therefore led to mistrust in institutions. If you can't trust what institutions are doing with spending public money. So before I finish my point, there's a very interesting quotation I found. What is fiscal transparency? That's the issue. Now, this political scientist made the following point. He said transparency is not just about restoring trust in institutions. Transparency is the politics of managing mistrust of institutions. So we need transparency in order to build institutional credibility, and it's the important way in which of managing the mistrust of public institutions we see in many countries around the world.
Thank you.
Those are my
Well, if there are no other comments, may I kindly request Dr. Dayaratna Silva, Executive Director of the Pathfinder Foundation, to make concluding remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Guruthilakan, Dr. Coomaraswamy, Dr. Samaratunga, distinguished officers, minorities, public officials, and especially those who are joining with us online. Let me take a few minutes to reflect on what we extensively heard from, say, horse's mouth who have extensive experience, and say a few words of our appreciation who made this event a success. The theme chosen for today's webinar, Managing Public Finance and the South Asian experience, could not be more relevant. To guide us through important subject, we were privileged to have three exceptionally qualified
highly accomplished resource persons. First, on behalf of the Pathfinder Foundation, let me express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Anoop Singh, who joined with us from Washington, very late hours there, I suppose, for your excellent presentation and interest in this event. I must thank for sending few copies of your Managing Public Finance book, which I have circulated about participants here. And I don't need to report, but based on your many years of experience at the IMF and your close engagement with the South Asian economies have given us a deeper understanding on the critical importance of effective fiscal policy management to create a kind of favorable condition for sustainable growth. Dr. Coomaraswamy and Dr. Kolobage mentioned, as we also learned that, recall at the time of this landmark reform in Sri Lanka, 1977, you worked with us, worked with the authorities in this market-oriented agenda, which I believe still though half-hearted implementation, still relevant today. So thank you, Dr. Anoop Singh. You are a true friend for joining with us. Let me thanks sincerely to Dr. Coomaraswamy from the Governor Central Bank and my good friend, my bashmate, my balcony mate, Dr. Samaratunga, former Secretary of Ministry of Finance, enlightening on this Sri Lanka's post-crisis fiscal sector reform. As I understood, we have 5 pillars, framework, new paradigm is the word I heard. There was some, I heard from that alone is not enough to achieve our targets. But thanks for your eloquent presentation, which clarifies such as complex issues with a remarkable clarity and insight. I must thank, I will fail if I do not thank our invitees here, physically present, Professor Kolobage, Ravi, Professor Rattasila, Rayas, Isala, and from young man from the Heritage Research for joining with us. It became such a lively debate. I feel that the time was not enough for us to this thing. Anyway, I must say, after announcing this webinar, we received an overwhelming response from the more than 75 people to join. But subsequently, yesterday again, I received personal material, communication disruption, and various things. They are able to join with us. We certainly will prepare some document based on this discussion to circulate for all the participants. Finally, special note of thanks to our young staff, Rani, Maitri, Safna, doing good job. Well, we look forward to continue this lively discussion on contemporary important issues and look forward to meeting you again. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Singh, thank you very much for joining us, as well as sharing your publication with us. And Dr. Coomaraswamy, Dr. Samaratunga, rest of the participants from the table, as well as those who are joining online. Thank you very much for taking part. and hope the session was useful for all of us. Thank you.
I must say, Rasanga also did a lot of work joining from.
He's also there. Okay.
Yes.
Hi, Anoop.
Thank you.
For the last 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
we have some refreshments outside.
Yeah. We are heading the department. I'm heading the public